At 7:30 a.m. on Saturday, December 1st, 2001, a man living in Buenos Aires was heading to his bank's ATM. He didn't want to believe the news he'd heard the night before. When the man inserted his card into the ATM and checked, he saw that all his money was still in his account. He entered an amount to withdraw, but the machine rejected it. He tried another amount, but it was rejected again. He tried a lower amount, and it still didn't work. It wasn't because there was no money. It wasn't because the account wasn't his. He simply couldn't access the money anymore. Because the government had made such a decision with a single signature while everyone was asleep at midnight. He looked around. There were other people at other ATMs on the same street. They were facing the same problem. But no one was speaking. No one was shouting. Not yet. It was like a scene from a bank freezing funds. People standing on the sidewalk, not yet fully grasping that something had changed. Over the next 19 days, this man would witness 5 different presidents take office in the country and bear witness to the largest sovereign default in his nation's history. And with a second document signed in silence, all his savings would lose their value. Another Argentine depositor, however, had managed to recover every single dollar of his savings. The difference between them wasn't luck. So what was the difference? To better understand that Saturday morning, we need to know what these people have relied on over the past decade. In April 1991, Argentine Economy Minister Domingo Cavallo drafted a law, the Convertibility Law. Under the law, 1 peso would be equal to $1. The law essentially stated, there are as many pesos as there are dollars in the treasury. In other words, if the central bank wanted to print money, it first had to earn dollars. For Argentina's middle class, this decision was not just a policy, it was a guarantee. It was a concrete promise from the government. You work, you save, and the money in your hands is worth the same as $1. The banking system opened accounts accordingly. People transferred their earnings into these accounts. Just 3 years later, more than 60% of time deposits were held in dollar accounts. 10 years passed. The economy grew. Buenos Aires joined the ranks of cities with the highest standard of living on the continent. The peso remained rock solid. So did the promise. However, what no one saw and what the system's architects did not explicitly state was this. The central bank's most fundamental role had been stripped away. It could not print money to support a bank in trouble. The promise and the power to rescue could not coexist. It was either one or the other. And until 1999, no one had been forced to choose between the two. In 1999, Brazil devalued its currency. Argentina's exports suddenly became expensive. The economy ground to a halt. Then it shrank. Then it shrank again. While all this was happening, the man standing in front of the ATM on December 1st was still saving money. In fact, the signs that this system was about to collapse were plain to see. People in a position to see these signs had already warned of them. In March 2001, the credit rating agency Moody's downgraded Argentina's sovereign debt from B1 to B2. Economy Minister Ricardo Lopez Murphy had resigned after serving just 2 weeks in office. The only person the government could turn to was Cavallo, the architect of this system. While Cavallo was supposed to instill confidence in the markets, in April he proposed pegging the peso to the euro. This proposal was quickly withdrawn, but it was too late. The issue had already been brought up for debate by the very person who had pegged the peso to the dollar. In July, an austerity bill passed through Congress. Public sector salaries and pension payments were cut by up to 13%. The most vulnerable segments of society were footing the bill to keep the system afloat. In August, the IMF transferred an additional $5.5 billion. It later became clear that this was the final bailout. In October and November, capital was flowing out of the country. The money was moving not slowly, but decisively. Government bond yields skyrocketed to levels that made taking on new debt nearly impossible. Institutions and investors capable of understanding the numbers could see that the banking system was filled with government securities that were losing value day by day. In short, those who saw the signs had already moved their money out. The money left in the vaults was primarily the savings of ordinary people. In the last 3 days of November, a total of $3.6 billion was withdrawn from banks. On November 30th alone, $1.3 billion in transactions took place. Once such a figure moved in a single day, there was no turning back. Everyone who has analyzed this period agrees on this point. This was not a political or legal situation. No decision, no package, no international support system could restore things to the way they were. And Cavallo had only placed one move left to make, and that day had come. Decree number 1570/2001 was signed on Friday night. It was announced to the public on Saturday morning. The implementation was very strict. People could withdraw a maximum of 250 pesos and $250 in cash per week. Electronic money transfers between accounts were permitted. However, in the country, rent, grocery shopping, and everything in the service sector operated on a cash basis. In such a situation, the decree drew a thick line between your money and the money you could actually use. Argentines gave this situation a name, El Corralito, the little playground. On the first business day following the decree, Monday, December 3rd, banks opened their doors for the first time. The expected chaos did not materialize. Documents from those days describe Buenos Aires as a city that had come to a standstill in its early days. Suit and tie-clad people sat inside bank branches on plastic chairs, waiting for appointments to access accounts they couldn't reach. News reports from the time in Clarín and Ámbito Financiero describe the atmosphere as a doctor's waiting room, with one key difference: no appointment would solve the problem. On December 5th, the International Monetary Fund announced it would not make the scheduled payment of $1.4 billion to Argentina. The reason? Argentina had failed to meet its budget targets. The practical implication of this announcement was clear. External support had dried up. The final door had closed in plain sight for everyone. On December 12th, Decree number 1638/2001 tightened the Corralito further by imposing restrictions on salary payments. On December 13th, a general strike was declared across the entire country. By December 19th, in provincial cities, markets were looted. In Buenos Aires, supermarkets were targeted. President de la Rúa declared a state of emergency. Cavallo resigned. And that night, in every neighborhood of Buenos Aires, people began banging on pots and pans from apartment windows, balconies, and kitchen windows. December 20th. At least 22 people lost their lives in clashes with security forces across the country. Fernando de la Rúa signed his resignation letter. He left the Casa Rosada, the Argentine presidential palace, by helicopter, flying over a square packed with people. He was the first of 5 presidents who would come and go within 12 days. Now we need to slow down, because this is the most misunderstood part of the story. And the reason for the misunderstanding is simple. Most people describe what happened as a single event, yet it was 2 separate events, 2 separate decisions made on different dates through different mechanisms that ruined the lives of different people. You already know the first one, December 1st, Corralito, a weekly cash withdrawal limit of 250 pesos. Painful, yes. Devastating, yes. But don't forget this. On that day, the money in your account was still yours. It was still in dollars. It was still exactly the amount you had deposited. You just couldn't access it. The second one hadn't come yet. After de la Rúa fled by helicopter, the country was effectively leaderless. On December 21st, Senate President Ramon Puerta took the presidential seat. 48 hours later, he stepped down. On December 23rd, Congress elected Adolfo Rodriguez Sá. Rodriguez Sá took the podium and announced that Argentina could not pay its $85 billion debt. Congress stood up and applauded, because finally someone had said what everyone had known for months, but no one had dared to say. Rodriguez Sá closed all banks that same day. A week later, he resigned as well. Then Eduardo Camaño for 2 days. Then, on January 1st, 2002, Congress elected Eduardo Duhalde. 5 presidents. 12 days. On January 6, 2002, Duhalde took his seat and signed the emergency law. What had stood for 11 years officially ended that day. 1 peso was no longer worth $1. The exchange rate was floated. But even that wasn't the moment your money in the bank vanished. That moment came on February 3rd. Decree number 214/2002. The government's official name for it was asymmetric peacification. It sounds technical. It isn't. It's an extremely simple thing. Think of it this way. You have $10,000 in the bank. When you wake up that morning, your account shows 14,000 pesos. The government has converted your dollars into pesos at a rate of 1.40. You look at the screen, the number has gone up, and for a moment you feel strange. Then you go outside and you realize. In the market that day, $1 is buying and selling for 4 pesos. So the 14,000 pesos in your hand are actually worth only $3,500 in real life. You put in 10,000. You got out with 3,500. The number in the account had grown. The value of what you held in your hand had been wiped out by 65 to 75%, and no one knocked on your door about it. No one asked. There was no national debate. A decree was signed, the figure changed, and your wealth was gone. That's why it's wrong to describe Corralito and Corralón as the same event. Corralito cut off your access to your money. Your money was still yours. Corralón changed the nature of your money. It was no longer yours. There were 64 days between the two, and within those 64 days there was a window open, known to very few, noticed by even fewer. During that 64-day window, some people took action. Very few, but they did. The weapon in their hands was a single word: amparo. In Argentine law, the right to appeal to the courts when you believe the state has violated your constitutional rights. Articles 14 and 17 of the Argentine Constitution guaranteed the right to property. The argument was simple. This money is mine. The law says so. The government is cutting me off. This is unconstitutional. Carlos Antonio Smith was one of the first to file a petition. February 1st, 2002, exactly 2 days before the currency devaluation decree. 6 out of 9 judges voted in Smith's favor. The court ruled, the Corralito is unconstitutional. Smith got his money back. In dollars. Exactly. In full. The ruling set a precedent, and everyone jumped on that precedent. By April 2002, 210,188 amparo petitions had been filed with Argentine courts. Over 210,000 people rushed to the same door. But the door didn't open the same way for everyone. A man named Massa held $184,475 in Bank Boston as of December 31st, 2001. When his account was converted to pesos, he went to court. Like Smith, he demanded his full dollar amount. He didn't get it. Because by 2006, the Supreme Court had shifted its stance. It had moved away from the constitutional violation framework of the Smith ruling and adopted a new principle known as shared effort. This principle stated, everyone suffered in this crisis. Depositors, banks, and the government alike. So let's share the burden together. Massa received an adjusted peso payment, far below the full dollar amount. Same freeze, same constitution, same courts, different outcomes. What was the difference? Timing. Smith filed his claim before the window closed. Massa filed after it closed. According to historical records, that window remained open for approximately 6 to 10 weeks. As the government established and reinforced its emergency powers on a legal foundation, the courts gradually shifted their stance. And at a certain point, full dollar reimbursement was no longer on the table. The legal route wasn't the only option. Before the Corralito began, people like Horacio Covas, Carlos de Sanso, and Ruben Ravena were setting up small barter clubs in different corners of Argentina. The idea was simple. You can trade without money. Goods for goods, services for services. These networks had their own currency. They called it Crédito. When the Corralito hit, these networks exploded. At its peak, 2.5 million people were part of this system. Across Argentina, at 4,700 different locations, in parking lots, school gyms, community centers, people gathered. One person brought food, another offered a haircut, yet another provided legal advice. A doctor's visit was paid for with Crédito. A lawyer accepted Crédito. The banking system had frozen. It wasn't barter. In an economy without money, people had created their own economy. The third path was quieter, and it's harder to name. In 2001 Argentina, not a single person's name had been recorded in official documents as holding physical gold outside the banking system. We have no names, no stories, only a pattern at the class level. When the peso fell to a quarter of its value, assets held outside the banking system remained as they were. Physical precious metals retained their value in dollars, because the pesoization decree could only reach accounts in banks. It couldn't touch the gold in your safe, under your floor, or inside your jacket. Corralito didn't end in a week. It didn't end in a month. It lasted a full year. On December 2nd, 2002, withdrawal restrictions were officially lifted, exactly 1 year and 1 day after it began. And on that day, what everyone had been expecting didn't happen. The banks opened. People went inside. A new collapse didn't happen. The decree designed to prevent a freeze didn't trigger the panic it was meant to prevent when it was lifted. This is ironic, and this irony is hardly ever discussed. Those who didn't win an amparo, who didn't hold assets outside the system, that is, the vast majority, found another way to seek compensation. The government issued Bowden bonds in September 2002, $2.6 billion, 10-year maturity. Consider this. On February 3, 2002, your money was converted into pesos. You had to wait until 2012 to receive your compensation, exactly 10 years after your deposit was converted. On March 5, 2003, the Supreme Court announced the San Luis ruling. It found the broader scope of the peso conversion framework to be unconstitutional. New doors opened for new lawsuits. But by that point, the legal landscape had changed so much that the clearest outcomes still belonged to those who acted earliest. The Smith window, the first 6 to 10 weeks, that was it. Trueque didn't last forever either. In 2003 and 2004, the networks collapsed one by one. The reason was simple: fake Crédito. So much fake money entered the system that inflation began within the network. People stopped trusting the Crédito. Once trust was gone, the system collapsed. Trueque had been useful during the most difficult phase of the acute crisis, but it wasn't a permanent alternative. It's important to understand this. That system wasn't a solution, but a stopgap. It helped people survive the worst days. Once the crisis passed, so did the system. On May 25, 2003, Nestor Kirchner took office as president. 5 presidents, frozen accounts, waking up every morning without knowing how much money was left. All of that was officially in the past. What remains are the numbers. In 2002, the economy contracted by 10.9%. Over the 4 years from 1998 to 2002, the total contraction was 28%. 1 out of every 4 pesos had vanished. Unemployment rose to 23.6%. Poverty, which stood at 38% in 2001, reached 57.5% at the peak of the crisis. More than half the country had fallen below the poverty line. These figures are accurate, but they are insufficient, because the numbers cannot convey the speed. On December 1st, Cavallo signed the decree. On December 20th, the president fled by helicopter. 19 days. 17 more days from December 20th to the official end of the exchange rate on January 6th. From Corralito to Corralone, from cash restrictions to forced conversion, 64 days. In 64 days, a decade's worth of savings vanished into history. The most common misconception about Argentina in 2001 is this: everyone lost everything. The documentary record doesn't say that. The outcomes diverged based on a single factor: timing. What people did during that narrow window between December 1st, 2001 and mid-February 2002. That's all. Those who went to court during that window got their money back in dollars. Those who waited, those who didn't know what to do, and those who continued to trust the system eventually faced the conditions set by the government: a devaluation from a market rate of 1 to 4 to 1 to 0.4 pesos. Those who entered the trueque system or held assets outside the banking system, however, preserved their purchasing power even during the worst days of that chaos. 13 years after the Argentine crisis, something similar happened in Europe. The country was Cyprus. The year was 2013. The mechanism was different. Not a redenomination, but a direct seizure of deposits exceeding 100,000 euros. But the framework was the same: a government reaching into private bank accounts via an emergency decree. The Cyprus incident lasted days, not months. The damage was more limited. Not every bank freeze ends the same way. Argentina's documentary record, the text of the decrees, the Supreme Court's own rulings, the records of individual cases, all point to the same thing. The gap between Corralito and Corralone was 64 days. And within those 64 days, there was a window. Most people either didn't know about it or refused to believe it until it closed. Carlos Smith slipped through that window. He applied within weeks. Through that window, which remained open for 6 to 10 weeks, he acted just in time. The question the historical record doesn't answer is this: if you had been standing in Buenos Aires on the morning of December 1st, 2001, with your card in hand, the machine rejecting it, your money there, visible in your account but out of reach, would you have known about that window? And would you have acted fast enough?